Thanks so much for coming. It's great to be here, and I always love coming to the Center for Fiction. I've been coming here since it was the Mercantile Library, which wasn't that long ago, I guess, and it's really an honor to read with Ben tonight, whose work I admire immensely. I don't know if you guys have read that story that was in the New Yorker this week. Did you guys, has everybody read it? It's so good. I mean, it's heartbreaking. It's so beautiful. It's so funny and dark. And he had told me that it was his most normal story, I think was the way that he put it. But it doesn't seem normal to me at all. So, anyway, it's a really nice... It's a really nice taste of what we're going to get with his next book, which is coming out, I guess, in January, right? Hooray! I actually read an earlier draft of it, if I don't mind, Ben doesn't mind me saying, and I think it's changed quite a bit since then. But I was completely blown away. I mean, I was sitting there. It was ready. He sent it to me. It was so long, and I thought, why am I talking about this so much? But I just have to say this one thing. But it was so, he sent me, we agreed to trade, and the manuscript he sent me was like 400 pages long, and I thought, oh my God, 400 pages of Ben Marcus. What am I going to do? I'm going to be sitting here for the next month reading, you know. But then I started reading, and I couldn't put it down. I was just lying on the couch reading, and I was just throwing the pages on the floor. And I mean, when I looked up, I had gone through like 80 pages, and I was like, it was already really, anyway, it's going to be great. You're going to love it. And now on to me. So my book is called Revolution, the Year I Fell in Love and Went to Join the War, and it's a memoir. And so it's about when I was 18, and I dropped out of college with my boyfriend, and we went to Nicaragua to try to join the revolution that was going on there. And you know, we got fired from everything we tried to do. We didn't know how to do anything. So anyway, this is sort of a document of that trip. So I'm going to read, it's told in really short chapters. I'm going to read a few really short chapters, and I'm going to start with one called Good Ideas. And it's about, we had become Christians. That was part of the reason why we were going on the trip. So, afternoons on the landing at the brothel. We were living in a brothel in El Salvador at this point. Afternoons on the landing at the brothel, I closed my eyes and prayed. What did I pray about? I prayed that everyone on earth would get what they want. But then I think about that and decide that was an awful lot. People want so much. So I prayed for people to get these particular things that I named in my mind, or at least for these particular people that I named to get these particular things, or for them to get them when the time was right, or when God wanted them to have them, if He did. If God didn't want them to have the things they wanted, then I didn't want them to have them either, and it was probably wrong to want them, so I prayed for their souls instead. I prayed for us to not want what we want, but to want what He wants, whatever that was. How was I supposed to know what He wanted? I'd never even prayed before that year. I prayed to learn what He wanted somehow, not to have the knowledge of God and the hubris that would come with it, but to see dimly the plan, or at least the section of the plan that involved me and the people I knew, so that I could pray for the right thing. Or at least I prayed, let me pray for the right thing accidentally, by coincidence or mistake. My faith had the side benefit of sending my Jewish atheist family into fits of despair. In my house, Judaism referred to an abbreviated Passover and a few jokes about candles around Christmas. Once I announced I was a Christian, my family whipped themselves into shape. They went to temple and they joined a temple and went every week. They enrolled my sister in Hebrew school. They celebrated holidays they didn't like or exactly understand, found the menorah in the garage. They put up a mezuzah, and my mother joined a Jewish study group for women. They made my sister have a traditional bat mitzvah complete with a great-grandmother's locket and chairs in the air. By that time, I had backslid into my atheist upbringing, but they weren't taking any chances. Yes, those days of faith were fun for the whole family, but bit by bit after the trip, I walked across the dance floor and sat back down with my family, where I remain, like a wallflower, patting my hair, watching the waltzers, admiring the grace of some, the awkwardness of others, but no, I will sit this one out. Long after I stopped being a Christian, and it was clear my brother and sister weren't going to become Christians either, my mother and father went to temple less and less and finally left off altogether, and everybody forgot about it. Except my sister. She is the last to forget. She still can't forgive me for Hebrew school. 3 days a week I had to go, she says, while everyone else was having fun. One day you and your God will pay. Okay, this next one I'm going to read. So I've been on this book tour, and I've been robbed twice so far on my book tour. So I thought I would read this about being robbed. It's called 60 Bucks. We'd been robbed all along, of course, but now it seemed as if robberies and avoiding robberies became the primary activities of our days. We were robbed over and over. We kept our money well distributed among our belongings and on our person, so the thieves made off with only a few dollars at a time, but it added up. My parents refused to wire us money, and George wouldn't ask his mother. We were eating bread for most of our meals, but still, George gave money to anyone who asked, at least a few cents. And he would not be mad if someone robbed us. This was a rule. They need the money more than us, he'd say. Blessed are the poor, for they shall inherit the kingdom. Observe the lilies of the field. I pretended to be pregnant sometimes for free food. My stomach had become permanently bloated. When you looked at me, it wasn't noticeable right away. Then you saw it, a small swell. And if I had my money belt around my waist on top of the swollen stomach, I really did look pregnant. People would bring food to our room. In one place we stayed, the dueño brought me cookies that gave me hives when I ate them, but the hives went away in a few hours if I didn't touch them, so I kept eating the cookies. He brought them every morning and I'd swell up into flake by evening. Once we were robbed by men who never came anywhere near us or our belongings. We were at the border. George was sick. The idea was to hurry into Nicaragua, where the doctors cost $5. He couldn't move much, so I had to kind of prop him up while we waited for the bus to leave. I was terrified, as usual. It was my conviction that, as the elder and as the instigator of this whole trip, he should be taking care of me. And if he was lying there shaking with fever, how could he? He wanted me to buy some black market Cordobas, the local currency here at the border where they were cheaper. He usually changed the money. I ran off and bought $60 worth of Cordobas from a man standing on the side of the road. The man gave me stacks and stacks of bills, so many I couldn't carry them all. I tried, but they kept falling on the ground, and I had to make 2 trips. I limped back to George with the second batch and dropped them at his feet. "What is that?" he said, raising his head a little. "What are we going to do with all that? How much did you change, like $50? Don't tell me you changed $50. You should have changed 10. I tried to get the money into our day bags, but it wouldn't fit. I had to get our backpacks down off the top of the bus and shove it in those, but it wasn't going in there either. "We'll have to throw it away," said George. "Good job." A lady with a plastic tub of tamales came over. "Hey," she said, "those guys say they're going to kill you." "How's that?" said George. Squinting at a few men across the street, they were standing in the dust, hands in their pants pockets, looking down the road. "For the money," she said. "It's not worth that much," I said. I could see George thinking, sizing the guys up. "Oh, come on," I thought. "Really?" "How about if we give them half?" said George at last. She shrugged. So we loaded half the stacks into the plastic tub and watched her cross over to the men. A stack of bills dropped in the dust. So I'm just going to read 2 more. One super short and one about the same length as the last one. When I was going to publish this, before I sent it into the editor, to my editor, Jillian Blake, for the final, for her to go through it one more time, I sent it to my parents to read because I thought, they better have a look at this. And my mom had all kinds of little things that she thought were wrong. So we had these big arguments, and so I just put it right into the book. so I'll just read one little tiny thing. It's called Wonderful Time. In fact, I'd been to El Salvador. When I was 6 years old, my mother and father took the whole family on a vacation car trip to El Salvador. We drove from Chicago to San Salvador in a station wagon, dropping in Mexico to see my grandmother. We slept in a tent. This was 1975, just before the trouble started. I remember driving down the gravel road through the rainforest. I remember the station wagon breaking down over and over, though my mother says it was a Dodge Dart and it broke down only once. And I remember my brother and me playing in the mud. We took a tiny airplane someplace, and then we saw some buildings. My mother says that must have been in Guatemala at Tikal. And then a Native American slept with us in our tent. She says that was a hired guide. And I peed in my sleeping bag. I listened to Sesame Street on my tape recorder, and then a bad man cut my chin with a knife. My mother says this last one didn't happen. Then we got stuck in a traffic jam, and I was sick with a stomachache, and I had to hold my head out the window so I could vomit onto the road. My mother says that didn't happen either, or if it did, it was in Mexico City or Texas. I remember the car kept breaking down. Dad was angry all the time and yelling. I wanted to go home. My mother says it was an adventure. She says we met so many nice people. She says we all had a wonderful time. Okay, the last one I'll read. It's in Nicaragua during the revolution. There was an embargo on the country, and so the United States wasn't trading with Nicaragua, and neither were most of the European countries. None of the Western European countries were trading with them. And so there were a lot of shortages. There were food shortages, there were toilet paper shortages, shampoo shortages, there was paper, you couldn't get paper. I mean, there were just so many things. You couldn't get cars. So anyway, this is kind of about that. And it's called Peanut Butter. Peanut butter. George and I got separate rooms. The engagement was off after all, but we told each other we needed separate beds in order to get some sleep. The beds were singles and we were sick and hot. The rooms cost $2 apiece. We split up our stuff, and George went into one room on one side of the atrium and I went into another on the other, and that was it for a while. I lay alone in the concrete room. Days passed. One morning, I got up and went to his room. It was empty, cleaned out, and I figured we'd broken up and he'd taken off, left me there. I went back to my room and got onto the bed. I lay there sweating for days. I didn't eat. A huge spider lived in the room, flat and fast, the size of a small plate. Now and then it came out, sat on the wall, and then scooted away. I watched for it and threw shoes its way, but didn't get it, and I lived in low-steam fear. The Internacionalistas, the foreign volunteers, talked all day and night outside my room. They sat at plastic white tables that they moved around to try to stay in the shade. They'd start out in the morning at one end of the atrium, and as the day went on and the sun moved across the sky, they moved the tables and chairs across the cement to the other end. The next morning, they'd carry the tables back and start over. I watched this all day. I had to leave the door to my room open a little because the roof was a strip of corrugated tin and the room worked like a convection oven. One day, an Internacionalista put his head into my room. "What do you do in here?" he said. "Go away," I said. "I'm sick." In fact, I wasn't sure if I was still sick. I felt the way I felt, sickish, for so long that I didn't know if this was illness or if this was just what I was, if this was me being normal and normal for me was sickish. "What is wrong with you?" "I don't know," I said. He was some sort of European, the young blonde kind who speaks perfect English. "Come out," he said. "I'm tired seeing you in here." "How do you think I feel?" I said. "I walk by the same room," he said, "see the same person. I feel like I repeat myself." "That's life, buddy." He walked in and looked down at me on my bed. "Did you see a doctor? You can see the doctor here for very cheap." "You better get out of here," I said. "My boyfriend's coming back." "What boyfriend? No one comes in here." Maybe I should have been nervous at this point, but I was used to being approached by men of all ethnicities and ages, inside and outside these hostels. I just tugged my dress over my knees. I was wearing my fruit basket dress, so called because of the pictures of large dark fruits on it. I had begun wearing it every single day. One day I washed it, and all the internacionalistas in the hostel congratulated me, told me how nice I looked, and said I should try a trick like that more often. Let's go to the movies, said the guy. There are no movies. Sure there are movies. You're thinking of Mexico, I said. You're thinking of Spain. I will take you to eat an ice cream then. He reached out to touch my leg, and I kicked his hand away. I know that place, I said. Every day they say they have a different flavor. Some days they say chocolate. Some days they say strawberry. But it's vanilla. Vanilla every day. That place drove me crazy. In one place we stayed, someone had written on the wall of our room, La vida es tan corta, comer helados panillos y bailar con hombres aburridos. Life is too short to eat vanilla ice cream and dance with boring men. Forget this town, he said. Let's go to India. They have beautiful rugs in India. We can lie on them and look at the sky. After all these years, I still remember the thing that impressed him most about India was the rugs. I don't even know what he was talking about. I've never been to India, and no one else I've met who has gone has mentioned rugs as the high point of their Indian adventure, though I'm sure there are indeed beautiful rugs to be found in that country. No thanks was what I told this guy. I'd say the same thing today. Okay, he said, I will bring you to my parents' house. Why would I go there? It's very nice. He drew the house in the air. It's full of rooms. What do I want with rooms, I said. I've got a room. He dropped his hands. I can't go back without you. We'd reached an impasse. I wasn't going with him, but he wouldn't leave unless I went. He bowed his head like in prayer. He closed his eyes. Tell you what you can do, I said. You could go get me some peanut butter. He opened his eyes. You know where to get peanut butter? Black market, I said. Military packets. There's a place. I'll tell you how to get there, but you have to promise to bring me some. Promise? Tell me where first. Promise first. Tell first. Promise first. He sat down on the floor. He put his head between his knees. I am sick of this revolution, he said. Thank you.
Hi. Deb, that was amazing. I paid Deb about, well, sort of in the high three figures to say some nice things about me. And Deb didn't give me any money at all. But I don't really need any money to say she's one of my favorite writers. And when her book, Minor Robberies, came out, Book of Stories, I just was so blown away. And I've read everything she's done, and her new graphic novel she's working on is really exciting with the artist Chris Doyle. And anyway, it's a huge pleasure to read with her. I want to read from The Flame Alphabet, a novel that's coming out next year. The book is about a language toxicity. I think that sort of describes it. Language makes people sick, spoken, read, seen on signs. And early in the book, the narrator and his wife are really sick, in particular from the speech of their daughter, and they can't really be around her, but they're getting more and more sick, and they're having trouble leaving. So I want to read just a few pages from that point. Children are immune to the problem. They can speak all they want without sickness, and it's something that they enjoy doing. It gives them a lot of power. By early December, we huddled at home, speechless. If we spoke, it was through faces gripped in early rigor mortis. Our neighborhood had gone blank, killed down by winter. It was too cold even for the remaining children to do much hunting. I don't know how else to refer to their work, but sometimes they swarmed the block, flooding houses with speech until the adults were repulsed to the woods. You'd see a neighbor with a rifle, and you'd hear that rifle go off. The trees stood bloodless, barely holding on in the wind. We sat against the window and waited, spying out at the children when they roved through. The children, they should have been called something else. barking toxic vocals through megaphones as they held hands in the street. I hoped they wouldn't turn and see us come to the door. I hoped they wouldn't walk up the lawn and direct their megaphones against the glass. And always I hoped not to see our Esther, that's the daughter, in these crowds. But too often this hope was killed because there she was in the pack, one of the tallest, bouncing in the winter nighttime fog, breathing into her hands to keep warm. She'd finally found a group of kids to run off with. If there was an escape to engineer, we failed to do so, even while some neighbors loaded cars, smuggling from town when they'd had enough. The quarantine hadn't been declared, but in our area they weren't letting children through checkpoints except by bus. Basic containment. If you wanted to leave, you left alone. Even so, bulky rugs were thrust into trunks, items that required 2 people to carry, usually wrapped up in cloth, sometimes squirming of their own accord. Just a clumsy game of hide and seek, children sprawled out in cargo carriers, children disguised as something else. Claire retired as my test subject. The narrator is a bit of a medical amateur trying to come up with a cure for the language sensitivity. So he's been inventing drugs in his kitchen and giving them to his wife, and they're not working very well. Claire retired as my test subject. She stopped appearing in the kitchen for night treatments, declined the new smoke. When I served infused milk, she fastened her mouth shut. If she accepted medicine from me, she did so unwittingly, asleep, whimpering when the needle went in. I couldn't blame her falling away like that, embracing the shroud of illness, but I did. I exercised nightly campaigns of blame and accusation, privately in the monstrous internal speech that is only half sounded out, a kind of cave speech one reserves for private airing. In these broadsides, Claire spun on a low podium and absorbed every accusation. If I prepared a bowl of steamed grain and left it on the table for her, salted as she liked it, pooling in the black syrup, she passed her spoon through it, held up a specimen for study, and could not, just never could, finally slide it in her mouth. For Claire, I cut cubes of a meatloaf, and at best she tucked 1 or 2 in her mouth where she could suck on them until they shriveled to tight gray husks. Claire no longer slept in her bed, and she seemed too listless even to maneuver to the crafts room, to the guest room, to anywhere she might be able to fall unconscious in private. I was always trying to offer her shield, a modesty curtain, so she could come undone, alone and unseen. She shouldn't have to collapse in hallways. If necessary, I helped her along, at least to a corner where I could erect a temporary blind. Once I found her asleep in the bathroom, one eye stuck open, leaking a speckled fluid. I crouched down and closed the eye, blotted it with my shirt. It opened again and she whispered at me, "Hi there." I looked down at her and she blinked, perfectly alert. Claire must have thought she was smiling, but that was so far from a smile. With my fingers, I tried to change the feeling, to reshape her mouth. I couldn't have her looking at me like that. Her lips were cold and they would not stay where I arranged them. Her face had the weight of clay. "Go back to sleep," was all I could think to say, and I draped a bath towel over her, leaving her to rest on the cold tiles. At home, I took charge of what remained of our dwindling domestic project. The blending of food into shakes, the cleaning of all of our gray traces. I formed a packing plan, a strategy with regards to the luggage, mapped a route to outskirt lodging. Our pajamas, robes, towels, dish rags, these I washed every day, closing myself in the laundry room where the hot engine of the machine drowned out noise and thought. Against the hum of the washer, I was, for a little while, nobody much, and this was just how I preferred it. I left Esther's warm folded clothes in her bedroom. Often they went untouched. Or later, after Esther had plowed through the house before returning to her gang, I'd find the pile toppled onto the floor, a heap of gray crumbs like someone's ashes dumped over it. Claire's robe went mostly unwashed because she didn't like to take it off. And if I ever found her half asleep and staring into nowhere from her resting place, She wouldn't respond when I asked if I could do any laundry for her. She'd just smack her lips to indicate thirst. It'd be nice to have fresh clothes, right? I could clean these and have them back to you in 2 hours. I tugged at her robe and she pulled away from me, threw an arm over her face. Your robe will be nice and warm out of the dryer. We could get you covered in extra blankets in the meantime. It'll be nice to be clean. You'll feel better. I spoke to Claire as if she understood me, but she only stared. I spoke to her through a stiff, heavy face that seemed fitted on my head solely to block me from speaking. I sounded like a man underwater. As our tolerance departed for the speech of children, so too did our ability to speak. Language, in or out, we heard, produced or received, a problem, any which way. To keep Claire hydrated, I'd have to peel back her hospital mask, prop her upright, and press the sippy cup straw through the gluey seal of her lips. I lowered the mask when she was done, and flowery welts of orange juice soaked through the fabric. When it was time to clean her, I filled a bowl with warm, soapy water, settled it down over a towel at her bedside. With a washcloth, I soaped her neck and face. She lifted her chin, gathered back her hair. I squeezed little pools of water over her throat. I placed another towel under her feet, then lifted and washed each leg, rubbing as softly as I could, watching the little streaks of redness follow my cloth. Claire's legs rose too easily in my hands, as though they'd been relieved of their bones. With the dregs of the soapy water, I reached into Claire's robe and washed her stomach, the skin that once held her breasts. I hugged her up off the bed so I could wash her back, pushing the washcloth under the robe, feeling each hollow between her ribs, a sponginess I did not want to explore. Then I settled her back down again, pulled up her covers, lifted the mask from her mouth so I could replace it with a clean one. She forced a smile, but a shadow had spread under her gums, a darkness inside of her mouth. When I brought her soup, warmed the long bread she loved, or offered Claire some of the candies that usually she could never refuse, baby amber globes with a cube of salted caramel sealed inside, at most, she would roll over, heave, pull the quilt above her head. It was only when the front door swung open and Esther came in the house, sweating, crazed, in clothing I'd never seen, that Claire sat up, drawing on some last reserve of power. She always wanted to catch sight of Esther, to just watch her from a doorway, so she followed her from room to room, keeping her distance, and Esther tolerated the stalking. You could see in her whole body the effort she made to endure this attention she loathed. Esther had changed. Her face was older, harder, filthy from her outings, but spectacularly beautiful. Of course, I must think this. I'm her father. Fathers do not easily succumb to assessments of ugliness where their children are concerned. Esther had never been a cute child, but she'd grown threateningly gorgeous in the last few months. She let her mother watch her from a safe perimeter, and she was considerate enough not to turn on her with speech, to stop and speak until Claire fell. Esther saw her mother in doorways, looked away, said nothing. It was her greatest kindness to us, that silence. I will always appreciate the restraint she showed in those last days. Esther's birthday fell on a Sunday. Claire was oblivious, wheezing beneath the medicated linen sack I'd dipped for her. I realized what the day was late in the afternoon after crawling on the floor of the shower, the water softening my face. What was called Lebov's mark had grown in fast, a hardened lump under my tongue, anchoring it down. The shower seemed to help. On the tiled floor, I could tilt my face into the spray, let the heat loosen my throat. In the bathroom, I exercised my voice so that it would not flow from me in shapeless moans. Last year, when Esther turned 14, she'd wanted no party, just money and privacy. She used those words exactly, then said, "Why would you even ask me what I want if you have no intention of delivering on it?" Delivering on it was her phrase, to which Claire and I could only shrug, agree, say, "Okay, sure, of course we can give you that, honey." And then we wondered, how much? How much money? How much privacy does she want? Esther wanted us to promise that we'd not talk about the birthday, not mention her age, absolutely not remark on how much she'd grown up or changed or stayed the same, not reference what she was supposedly like as a baby. Since why would I want to know, she asked, what you think you used to think of me? She claimed such a detail was an obscure statistic, a piece of information that future corpses, her phrase, stored in their bodies as a charm. Esther reasoned that in any case we never felt fondly toward her at the time, that we loved her best in hindsight. It was true. Our family suffered from issues of calibration. Even now, she said, it's happening right now. Years from now, you will have distorted this moment, which is an awful moment, into something nice, something sweet. And you'll badger me with that memory until I agree, which I'll only do to make you stop talking. You are professional distorters, incapable of simply seeing a situation for what it is. Years from now, the things we will do. In the end, Esther really did underestimate us. Memories of any kind for Esther were similarly off limits. Shed the skin and burn it, apparently. Articulated memories that enjoined Esther to picture herself in vivid narrative detail doing something she now no longer recalled, like skating in a rope chain of children when she was 7 down the traffic lines of an iced-over Wilderley street. This was the week the elm fell to lightning and we built a snow fort around it. Or climbing a ladder stretched flat on the grass and pretending it was vertical so that each time she let go of it, she fake tumbled to the bottom. Such images were an attack. They caused physical pain, and why did we insist on hurting her? Why did it seem that we were somehow instinctually driven to cause her pain? It was not right to hurt her on her birthday, especially on her birthday. What kind of parents were we, after all? We'd grown so accustomed to hiding our feelings around Esther that it seemed easier to just not have those feelings in the first place. You people and your memories, she'd said through a sneer. Esther requested that her birthday not serve as an occasion for us to pretend that we were closer than we really were, since why should that random date, a date based on the most flawed and sentimental calendar, make us suddenly tell lies about how we really felt? Sweetie, I countered. See, like that, she said. There's a lie right there. You think that a generic endearment will somehow show how you feel towards me, talk me out of how I actually feel. One word is going to do that, a word used for pets. How many people use that exact word just to hide what they feel? It's like you're throwing up on me, actually. I feel like you just threw up on me. I'm going to stop there. So Deb and I will answer questions, and we'll brave the 10-minute awkward silence before the first question is launched that we've probably planted in the audience. But really, ask Deb about her trip. Ask her if she's ever been back. Ask her where George is. The love of her life. Where is George? Has George read the book?
I think I could answer that. Well, I had to hire a private eye to find him, and that's all in the book. So you'll have to read it if you want to know. But since then, that's true. But you can't answer everything. Anyway, since then I have had a little more contact with him. So I guess that what I can tell you is that there's someone in the book who I talk about who contacted me after the book was written and said, my feelings are so hurt. So that was really sad. But what he said was that he was going to call George and tell him what was going on. And so he did. And then he relayed a message to me that, first of all, George thought I could come up with a better name than George. That isn't his real name. And then the other is he wondered if he was due any royalties. Of course. But then he said he was just kidding. So I like that he sort of sent me a joke through a passage. So that's all that I've heard.
Seriously, we'll happily answer any questions.
What would have been the answer about the royalties? How do you not say that second part?
Well, before I even got to before my friend was even able to relay the just kidding part, I said, of course he's not doing any royalties. You know, what do you think this is? I'm the one who wrote the book. And then he said he was just kidding.
Because when I say just kidding, it's usually just to sort of get myself out of.
To diffuse.
Ben, is the language toxicity limited to just written and spoken language, or is it also affecting nonverbal, like signing and other kinds of gestures? I mean, is the source of it just the communication of thoughts? Is that what's making people sick?
Well, it's sort of revealed gradually in the book. Nobody in the book really knows, and they keep thinking some forms of communication will actually work, but they really don't. And so the disease escalates pretty fast. And I guess it's kind of a spoiler, but it's pretty much all comprehension, actually. Understanding makes you sick.
Understanding things and people, or just people?
What's the difference?
Some things aren't people.
This gentleman is a philosophy professor. You know, it's funny because I actually spent a lot of time worrying about the logistics of the disease. That was something I really struggled with because there are all these apparent anomalies and discrepancies and inconsistencies, and it completely vexed me. It drove me nuts. And one way I think I tried to deal with it, you know, I tried to build all this logic in and put it in the book, and it looked like I had done that. And then in the end, I sort of had a character yell at the narrator for expecting logical coherence to manifest itself in an epidemic. And I don't know if that, you know, on the one hand it seems like a total cop-out, but it was a way not to sort of, I guess, impose some strange sort of order on what was happening in the book, and allow everyone's confusion to be part of the story. I don't know if that makes sense.
Can you talk a little bit more about the idea behind the book? I mean, how you think language is an epidemic and comprehension is an epidemic. So
I think that I wanted to come up with something that would be the worst thing that could happen to somebody like me, and that would be losing language and losing my children. And then I wanted to see what would happen if I could push that into a story. And losing language seemed like such a big, strange idea, and it took me a long time to figure out what kind of story I could tell about that. And I guess for some reason I'm interested in having a character and taking everything away from him, and then sort of pulling his cord and pushing him out into the world. So language is just something I don't think I could live without. And so I guess it was just about going from there, coming up with a little idea and then trying to write it down.
Along those lines, can you talk a little bit about your story in the New Yorker and where the idea from that came?
Sure. The story's called Rolling Wood, and it's about a guy who is a sort of single parent for a little while, taking care of his 1.5-year-old who may or may not be sick. It's kind of a similar motivation in that I have 2 kids, and it's unfortunately really easy to be up in the middle of the night freaking out about the kinds of things that could happen to them. And I guess I wanted to tell a story that was about that kind of fear without having anything unusual happen, really. And so moment by moment, I wanted it to be very plausible. And I guess I used to get up with my son, and like he used to wake up at like 4:11 for the day, you know, where when you get woken up at the wrong point in your sleep cycle, and you feel physically sick, and not only sick, but you know that at 9 you have to go to work. So you have 5 hours to kill before everyone else's day starts. And you go out on the street and you see people walking around, they're just waking up and having their coffee, and you've had like 3 pots of coffee already. And I mean, I think that was just the situation of just being in the kitchen with my kid and him screaming so loud that as I tried to soothe him, I couldn't even hear my own voice. And besides that, I guess I can't say how it evolved. I just wanted to see if I could tell a story and make it feel really realistic about what that was like. And I suppose, to be honest, I just heaped a whole ton of hardship on him in like one little increment at a time, each thing on its own, sort of not such a bad thing, and no one in the story has a large perspective on like his week and a half of what's gone on. He's the only one who sort of, he's just on a bad spree, bad luck. So yeah, it's kind of garbled, but.
I have one for Deb, actually. Sorry. Your book, I haven't read it, but it seems like the kind of thing that someone might normally write while they were experiencing it. And you've written a few other books before you got to this, so I was wondering what inspired you to revisit that experience and write about it now?
Well, I think that I had been wanting to write something about that trip for a very long time. I had tried to write the book as a novel before, only that I felt very self-conscious about the fact that most of the things had actually happened to me. So I kept trying to change the book, and at one point, and I think it's worse carnation, it was a spy thriller set in the 80s in Central America. And that was a very sad moment. And then I tried to write, I went back to Central America, and I found a lot of the old, we had been interviewing a lot of people. We'd been interviewing priests and politicians who had been involved in the revolution throughout, in 1987 when we went. So I went back and I found some of those people, and I was interviewing them, and I thought I would write some essays about the state of liberation theology today, and that really didn't work. And so then I tried to write stories, and then finally I just sort of abandoned all the material, and I wrote what became my novel, Vacation. And then I was very excited because I thought, that's it. I'm done with Central America. Thank God. I wrote a book about New York, people in New York, and then someone wrote me and said, "Congratulations for finishing that Nicaragua book," because by the end of the book, everyone's in Nicaragua or dead trying to get there. So then I decided to go ahead and write the memoir, and then it came very, very quickly because I had so many scenes already written from. I had started writing scenes from it, like that part that I just read, Peanut Butter. I bet you were wondering how in the world could she remember all that dialogue, but I actually wrote that when I was 25. So I wrote that many years ago, not that long after it happened, and I tried to keep it exactly. I only changed a few things. I just added a little bit and subtracted a little bit. So it was just a matter of, when I decided finally to write that, it was just a matter of gathering old pieces that I had written over the years and find them and kind of line them up, and then to kind of create an arc. It's a coming of age story, really. It's a love story. So I had to sort of find what that would look like.
Thank you all.
Thank you.